they control find Satan?
Yeah, so I'll get to that. We'll get to that. So here's what happened. People were talking about how historic the Trump trial was. And so I got to thinking, what was the longest trial in American history? And I found something that was so far beyond, like, just to preface this is on the title slide, as you can see. The word Satan appears in the Wikipedia page for this trial 18 times.
Man, they got my boy.
To make sure we're all on the same page, how long is the average criminal trial? This is a pretty flexible range. The O.J. Simpson trial famously took forever. That trial took 8 months. The Trump trial took about 6 weeks. Very, very short for a criminal trial. How long do you think the longest trial in American history took?
2.5 years.
Considering it's my boy Satan, 2,000 years.
2,000 years? It's still going, actually.
6 years, 3 months, and 23 days.
So this took 7 years.
My God.
A big reason that it took 7 years was that 124 witnesses were called upon. Almost every single one of those 124 witness testimonies was completely stricken from the record.
Is this trial something to do with the satanic panic of like the 90s with like Pokemon and
So
rock and roll?
Tim, let's talk about the world of the 80s. Was a very interesting time. You had a lot of people either doing drugs when they shouldn't have been, or not taking medication that they definitely should have been. So in the middle of all of this, we have the satanic panic. So satanic panic, it is worth noting, was taken completely seriously at the time. Part of satanic panic, and this is a real term, with its own Wikipedia page, by the way, led to what was known as daycare sex abuse hysteria. And it was all started by this stupid book called Michelle Remembers. Now, I want you to recognize that this was legitimately used as training materials in the 1980s for social workers. This was a guy who was a psychotherapist, and his patient, Michelle Smith, who was so dependent on him that by the time he declared that she no longer needed medical treatment, she made up an entire story about how when she was 5 years old, her family was in a satanic cult, which referenced at multiple points a sprawling network of satanic churches, older than the Christian church. Remember, this is the 80s. Everybody is on drugs, and this book is circulating talking about how children are being ferried away to satanic cults. Like I said, this is known as the daycare sex abuse hysteria, and this is the full list of major examples of these kinds of court cases. We don't have time to delve into every single one, so like I said, we're focusing on the first on the list, the McMartin preschool trial. So the schizophrenic who started it all, fun fact, that's not actually a picture of her. I can't actually find a photograph of this woman. Her name was Judy Johnson. She takes a job selling lamps and she needs somewhere for her kid to go. She decides that she's going to take him to this McMartin preschool in sunny California where she lives. Small, tiny problem. There's a huge waiting list to get her child enrolled in this daycare. That's not a problem at all. She just takes him to the building and leaves.
What, like outside?
Yes. She just drops her kid off in front of the preschool and drives away.
I mean, yeah, they surely will take them then.
That is a bold strategy.
1980s problems. They need 1980s solutions.
This entire trial stemmed from her kid who wasn't even enrolled in the school. She has a hard time keeping her kid clean. She has a hard time keeping herself clean, honestly. She takes her kid to a doctor and says, my son is being abused. Look, he has this rash. She is claiming that this daycare has started to abuse her child. The doctor looks at her and looks at the kid and realizes that it's probably just because he is not cleaned. Because she's not being taken seriously by a doctor, instead, she calls a police officer and starts to describe some absolutely insane things. Billy describes having communion in a church. A prayer similar in sound to the Lord's Prayer was recited. A goat climbed up higher, higher, higher. Then a bad man threw it down the stairs. It woke up later. Nobody had clothes on under their robes. Billy had a robe on, too. They put a Band-Aid on his finger. Old Grandma played the piano. Lots of threats were made against Billy and his family. It's unclear whether it was a doll or a real baby. Billy says real baby. But the head was chopped off and the brains were burned. Billy said Peggy killed the baby. Peggy had scissors in the church and she cut Billy's hair. Billy had to drink the baby's blood. Ray wanted Billy's spit. He put it on the altar. The baby was big like Billy. It screamed. So McMartin Preschool had various rumors circulated about it, ranging from that it had a secret network of underground tunnels, which were scanned for. You could probably guess how many subterranean satanic tunnels they found.
At least 7.
There were rumors of children's bodies being buried on the premises. So the family that ran this preschool were charged as a company, essentially. They were charged as all 6. And that's important. That'll come up way later. So the trial. There's a reason we don't make children testify under oath anymore. And this is fascinating. So the prosecution recorded on videotape all of their interrogations with these kids. Here's an excerpt from one of these testimonies. Boy, well, I didn't really hear it, referencing the song Naked Movie Star. I just heard someone yell it out from the... He's interrupted by McFarlane, who is a social worker. Maybe your Mr. Alligator peeked in the window one day and saw them playing it, and maybe he could remember and help us. And the boy said, well, no, I haven't seen anyone playing Naked Movie Star. I've only heard the song. To which the social worker responds, what good are you? You must be dumb.
Mr.
Holy
Alligator
shit.
ain't no snitch.
So a child interview expert was actually asked about this, and he says, if you go back into the transcripts, things were said like, Mary's got a good memory. Don't you want to have a good memory? To get children to verify each other's testimonies, which is outright fabrication of evidence. This family was in jail for 7 years on the fabricated testimony of children coerced out of them by state prosecutors. And I brought up the O.J. Simpson trial for a reason, because these were the same prosecutors that failed to convict O.J.
I just don't know how these prosecutors could be like, Your Honor, don't worry, a stuffed alligator says that we are right.
So they wind up searching the homes of this family, and here are the strongest pieces of evidence that they could find. A satanic robe, quote unquote, which was literally a graduation gown.
Yeah, from Satan Academy.
SU?
Balls of yarn, which were their legal stand-in for the rope that was allegedly used to tie these children up, and their own blind belief. The lead prosecutor is on the record saying, I believe in this case, I believe all of the crimes occurred. And that's what I intend to argue to a jury. They were so blindly convinced that they were just forcing these kids to make up testimony and fabricate information and corroborate each other's information. But it gets worse. The social worker urged parents to drive around town with their children and point at possible perpetrators.
Mr. Alligator in like the bushes, the sniper rifle. Just like, shoot that man.
Children were pointing out community leaders, gas station attendants, and store clerks. When I said that 124 individuals were questioned as witnesses, I meant it, because it wasn't just the kids. Half this town was pulled into this single court case. That's why it lasted 7 years. So after 7 years and $15 million, not one person was convicted. Not a single individual, because this trial actually lasted so long. Reform came around to the judicial system. This trial lasted so long that the law caught up to it.
Imagine being the jury on this thing.
By the time this thing skidded into the finish line on a hubcap remaining from the original car, if one more juror had dropped out, it would have been a hung jury. It would have been a mistrial, because there just were no more original jurors to render a verdict. But if you thought that that was the end of it, you're wrong, bucko, because they retried one guy. Ray Bucky was the person at the daycare who Judy Johnson's kid, Billy Johnson, had spent the most time with. This man has just spent 7 years of his life in jail. And that's why I said it was important to remember that his family was tried together, because it's not technically double jeopardy if you try an individual instead of the group that they were part of originally.
You spent all those years in jail. They're like, sorry, sir, another stuffed alligator has come forward.
This man is not convicted of a single crime. So what did we learn from all of this? Well, we learned quite a lot, actually. The graph here represents the recordings that were made of the interrogations of those children. What I want to draw your attention to is the introducing information bar graph on the far right. They were just deciding what the truth was, making these kids say it, and then bringing that as evidence against these preschools. And that is how Satan won. So many of these kids wound up in therapy for years just based off of the imagery put in their heads by the prosecutors. More trauma was done to these kids by the people, quote, trying to help than the ones who had allegedly committed the wrongdoing in the first place.
Isn't there a glistening irony to that? Of like people who would propel or perpetuate like a satanic panic were inherently causing more problems than
the ones that they were accusing? Yeah.
What if it's me looking down on me? The world above must also be. This could go on forever.